Welcome everybody to another Tuesday Camberley Chess Club Zoom meeting, and tonight we have the pleasure of a Grandmaster, Peter Wells, who's going to take us through what he's billed as exchange sacrifices. Peter's been a long-term England top player, FIDE Master in '82, International Master in '87, and GM in '94, I believe. And I think most people know him for opening books and improving your chess books. And Peter's particularly this evening said he wants lots of audience participation. So Peter, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Martin. Yeah, whether I come to regret asking for lots of audience participation or not remains to be seen. But okay, so exchange sacrifices. I guess I should start with why the topic. Well, I think in a sense, you know, any topic which reflects an interest in imbalances is in itself intrinsically interesting. I think that from a really early stage of our chess lives, well before we think in terms of things like imbalances, we're actually quite conscious of we're sort of subconsciously aware of these things. For example, I mean, as a child, long before I looked deeply into any of the theory of these things, I was very, you know, as most people are, I think, interested in gambits. You know, we look at, we naturally, as a child, look at things where we sacrifice a pawn or something to get rapid development. I think it's one of the early stages of play for many people. And even, you know, I was probably stunting my growth a little bit by playing the knight d7 Caro-Kann at far too early an age. But even during that period, you know, I could have a little bit of impetus with the white pieces and was, you know, very interested in and constantly researching with my friend obscure pawn sacrifices, some of which turned out to be hopeless. Actually, most of them turned out to be hopeless. But I think nonetheless, you develop a sort of feel for the initiative, which is quite useful later on. And then later, you know, you get an idea of the breadth of things that's covered by compensation. So at the beginning, you might look, for example, just at development, speedy development, attack on the king in the center, those kind of things, which the gambits tend to revolve around at that stage. But then later you phase in weak squares, structure, and all those kind of things. And I think right throughout chess, thinking in terms of imbalances is one of the most interesting aspects of the game. And again, I think with exchange sacrifices, if I look back on my own experience of them, I sort of start with a period where they sort of come fairly naturally as a kind of fighting for the initiative thing. And then later in my life, in 2 or 3 different chunks, I got very interested in the kind of theoretical side behind them. And I think, you know, I want to share a little bit of my thoughts on the theoretical side of them, but I think I might kick off, just to ensure that I don't lose people during the theoretical bit, I'll kick off with a practical example, probably from, although it's not from a particularly early age, it's probably from just before the period where I started thinking a lot more and writing a lot more about kind of minor pieces and those kind of things. So can I kick off with an example from a game I played in 1993? A lot of the things, I'm going to try and cover several examples during the talk, and some relatively quickly. So I want to, you know, most of them I won't start from the beginning of the game, but I think this one, the interesting action happens early enough that it's worth kicking off for move 1, if that's okay. So this is against Andrew Ledger, who I obviously just mentioned in the context of the just finished British Championship, who played extremely well. This wasn't one of his finest games, I think it's fair to say, and he made a rather rash pawn it's a Grunfeld, and he made a rather rash pawn break in the opening. We'll come to that in a moment. Okay, so if anyone's got any questions as we go through, stop me, but I don't really intend to discuss the opening because it's not tremendously relevant to the theme. I don't know why I'm clicking in the moves. I should be just right arrow clicking in the mindless manner. Okay, so an exchange Grunfeld, and this was right back in 1993. I was already quite a devotee of the kind of, then as it was, fairly modern variation of the exchange, where white plays rook b1 with the intention in many cases of sacrificing a pawn with d5, for example, if black plays c6, knight c6. Andrew played it in one of the ways which is quite sensible, quite rational, quite in keeping with kind of Grunfeld aims, but trying to avoid a very theoretical battle early on by just developing with b6. I still think it's one of the very decent systems to look at for black. Although there are probably in the sharp lines 1 or 2 actual problems with this now, which is why we see a bit less of it than we used to. Bishop b7 and now queen d3 to defend the pawn. And now black constantly has to keep a lookout for the move d5 by white. So he took and played e6, which is one of several ways of reasonably dealing with d5. Rook d1. I mean, black has the constant option of bishop a6, and white's moves sort of reflect an awareness of that. In this position, bishop a6 is one decent move. Knight d7 perhaps would be another. I can't exactly remember the theory anymore, but what black played is definitely a little bit on the rash side. After queen d7, bishop g5, black decided to try and put some pressure. I mean, obviously the first line of pressure in the Grunfeld is to put pressure on the d4 pawn. The second sometimes, and it has applicability in some cases, is to attack the center with the f5 break. I think the f5 break here is rather perilous, as we'll see, but you can kind of see a light square based motivation for it. So black played f5, I took, rook takes, and now I think I made the right organization of my pieces. I quite wanted the move knight e5 because I'm quite keen to activate this bishop on e2. And obviously I need to keep an eye on the bishop on g5 as well, but I don't want to retreat it because I think it's pretty well placed. So I played queen e3. And again, there's some thoughts of pressure against e6, but my main idea is probably to play knight e5 and bring the other bishop into play. Black needs to emphasize, he's made some concessions and he needs to emphasize the strengths of his position, hence bishop d5. So he has this nice square for the bishop. And I think it's fair to say that this bishop is sort of shaping up to be black's best piece, certainly his best minor piece. Okay, the queen can put in a claim, but the bishop's a pretty strong piece. So knight e5, queen b7. So some vague efforts to threaten. In fact, bishop g2 may be threatened at this point, although after the move I make, bishop g2 is not an issue anymore because that bishop is going to get trapped. So I play bishop g4 to drive the rook back to f8. And if black had taken on g2, I have essentially f3 trapping the bishop. Is that sort of reasonably clear to everyone? Okay, this is the position I wanted to just reflect on a moment. So there's a lot of good things going on for white. I have the makings of some kind of attack on the king side. Black, on the other hand, has, he has decent bishops. He has an excellent bishop on d5, perfectly respectable bishop on g7. He's just slightly lagging in development. And this lag in development is one of those kind of clues, I suppose, that it might be the moment to try and do something a little bit special. So maybe I could get our first bit of audience participation by just asking people for some ideas here for white.
Knight takes g6 a possibility?
It's certainly definitely a theme in the position, but at the moment I think it's probably not going to get very far because the queen can swing over to f7 when I take on e6. So knight takes g6 takes, bishop takes, something. I think in a position like this I'd be worried after queen f7 that the attack is probably coming to an end. The queen will have to move and that will give black an extra tempo for, white could play d5, but I don't really trust the compensation here without queens. Okay, black may well be advised not to take on e6. Something like knight a6 would be a decent move. I don't see this really stopping black from bringing the pieces out.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry, gone back an extra move there. Any other thoughts?
How about bishop h3?
Are you planning to go knight g4?
Well, no, I just wanted to guard the g pawn.
Oh, that was very That was very backward looking of you, Jane. I want you to be moving forward and threatening him. I mean, yes. I mean, actually, it
You
does
probably
also
missed
it does
it.
also release the G4 square for the knight, which isn't so it could claim defense and attack, I suppose, as a. I think
Gosh,
white has
thanks,
more
Pete.
incisive things.
Well, I've got to suggest rook b5.
Yes, thank you. I thought somebody would at the very least tune into the sort of the theme of the day and realize this is what my children at school do. If we have a theme of the day, they tune in immediately and sort of get the answers without any shame at all. But there's an admirable hesitation here about that. Yes, rook b5. I mean, basically the thinking is simply it's on two counts. It's black's best minor piece, which I think isn't usually in itself sufficient grounds for an exchange sacrifice. I mean, there are more and more exchange sacrifices in the world today than there ever been, but that they'd be absolutely endemic if every good minor piece justified one. But it's also the bishop which is defending black's major weakness, and it's not just a sort of semi-academic pawn weakness. It's a weakness from the point of view of attack on the king, I think. So yeah, rook b5, absolutely. And I like this. It's a relative. I mean, I've got quite a large database of exchange sacrifices now because I've been doing quite a lot of thinking about the subject. It's a relatively rare subset where the rook actually sort of chases the minor piece in a rather undignified fashion. Like most of them sort of arise more naturally, but this one, the rook is making absolutely no attempt to disguise its intentions. So I think that's a relatively rare group because there's not. Well, let's see. What can anybody tell me what the main threat is if black doesn't respond? For example, if black played just a developing move like knight a6, or worse still, if black attacked the rook with a6, how would white sort of win pretty much immediately?
Rook takes d5.
Yes, and after, okay, so particularly in the case of a6, it's worth noting that e takes d5 gets mated immediately. Bishop e6 check, king h8, and then knight takes g6. And I mean, this is going to be a pretty unpleasant attack in most circumstances, but in the ones where the knight hasn't even left the back rank, so the f8 rook is undefended, it's mate immediately with queen takes f8 after queen h7. So that one is absolutely clear cut. So the more the slightly more testing capture is queen takes d5, and then I think white has a pretty brutal way forward.
Can we take on g6?
Yeah, exactly. We just take on g6, and about the only, well, it's threatening bishop takes e6, but it's also threatening knight e7 check, winning the queen in both cases. So I think rook e8 is about the only move that defends those, and then knight e7 check is fairly straightforward because again, it's not just that we've won a pawn with a strong position, but there's going to be basically no way to defend e6. So black needs to basically do something to cover e6, which is what he did. He played, so his move is helpful in one respect. He played rook e, sorry, I should put that book back on b5. He played rook e8, which clearly helps to prepare the move e takes d5, but makes things even worse in the case of queen takes d5 because then white has bishop f3, immediately winning a bunch of material. So now the question is, how do we do this with white?
Mm.
Knight takes g6 straight away.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Knight takes g6 straight away.
So knight takes g6 straight away. Aha. Knight takes g6 straight away. I'm honestly trying to remember if that move actually occurred to me at the time. I feel like it probably should have. That is an interesting
Oh, yes. It does look.
It's a very interesting move. So so there's big problems after. Well, I suppose it gives me the option to play queen takes in a context that doesn't lose a whole lot of material, but it's not a very pleasant option. So if I play pawn takes knight, rook takes bishop, queen takes, I'm only going to be pawns down rather than pieces down, but I don't like it. That's interesting. Okay, I'm kind of slightly stumped. What if I play a move which attacks the rook and defends e6 at the same time? So something like, no, that's not going to help either.
No. Well, yeah, c6 defends the rook as well, doesn't it? Queen c6. So you can then take with the pawn.
Yeah, but then I would be quite worried about knight e7 check still being extremely strong because black's pieces are all hanging around the back rank.
One move
Okay,
down.
maybe you may have found an alternative solution. I don't know how it. I mean, I don't know how it compares with the one I played, but it looks quite strong. That's very interesting. Okay, so knight g6 is a possibility. I think the other is probably even stronger, and I say that with the confidence that comes from having put it on the engine just to check.
Bishop f3.
Well, I mean, that exchanges off black's best piece, but I'm not confident that it makes good use of the rook being on b5. So after bishop f3, if black just takes, I'm concerned that would give black a sort of a tempo to develop and then get to a slightly more normal, more healthy position, I think. No? I mean, it gives me, after, I think it would have to, I mean, queen takes is possible, but I don't like exchanging queens in positions where I have the initiative like this. So I would assume knight takes, and then something like knight c6 is probably playable. And it feels like black's back in the game at that point. Oh, sorry, so rook e8. So again, the theme of the talk gives a bit of a clue as to White's next move, but it would be nice to have White's next two moves, the one that justifies the sacrifice would be nice if possible. Any ideas for example, after rook takes, pawn takes, any ideas for a follow-up from White here?
Queen h3.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really a matter of, so what White's trying to do, I tried to locate the weakest spot in black's position, locate the piece which was kind of holding that together, remove the piece even at the expense of the exchange, and then try to show that the square which it's no longer defending is therefore very, very weak. And of course, it's, as most things in chess, it's enabled by certain specific things, such as the difficulty that the queen has coming to the defense of this e6 square. Basically, this queen doesn't have a square which impacts on e6. And it's also, I think, justified by the fact that if ever black exchanges on e5, the dark square bishop is going to be so strong that black is going to suffer immediate retribution. So, for example, bishop takes e5, pawn takes, rook takes. I think bishop e6 check is probably the most devastating way of doing it. And black is in all sorts of trouble here because king g7 will be met by queen h6, king h8 will be met by bishop f6. And there's no pleasant way to give back the exchange because my queen is still invading the position after queen f7, for example. So that one is that's not really an option for black. And of course, the threat again is bishop e6 check with sort of mating horrors. So black played h5 just to give his king a square and to avoid the knight takes g6 being mate. Was that clear? I mean, in this position, if black plays any other move, bishop e6, king h8, knight takes g6 is immediate checkmate. And if the king goes to f8, I think queen f3 is checkmate in various ways as well. So h5 may be the best move to try and survive. So bishop b6 check anyway, king h7, and then, well, actually, it's interesting. I would normally have said one more attacking move to kind of put black away, but the engine tells me that my very direct approach wasn't the best move. So it seems white already has serious options here. What's the human move in this position?
Knight g6.
Yeah, knight g6 is the human move. Now, I mean, at the time, my only reservation about that was that now black can simplify a little bit. And, you know, when you've made a sacrifice and you have an attack as strong as this, it's always a little bit disappointing when there's going to be simplification. Although I was pretty confident that all the simplified positions are a lot easier with the black knight still at home on b8. I mean, actually, I don't want to go into great detail after this. He gave back the exchange with rook e6. By the way, the engine says that f4, just controlling the position with threats of f5 and even of bishop f5 is the best move. But I think that's the sort of thing that humans don't by and large do. Those moments where we have a direct solution, it's very hard to play moves of that nature. But knight takes g6 is a strong move as well. Rook takes e6, queen takes, queen c6, the cause of my mild disappointment that I wasn't going to actually put him away in the middle game. And then I think it's important for me still to realize that even in the simplified position, part of my advantage comes from black's lack of development. So I think the right move is rook e1, avoid taking the queen and developing his pieces for him. Queen takes, rook takes, and the rest isn't terribly interesting because Andrew kind of looked a bit depressed at this point, if I remember, and fell apart rather. So he took on d4, knight e7. What do you do then? Bishop back to g7 again. Knight takes d5, threatening knight c7. So now he has to finally develop his piece, and then rook e7. And basically, this should be a fairly easy mopping up job. I can't account for the awful move he played at this point, but there is actually there's no good move for black anymore. It's a fairly easy job because I can't really see any moves that even maintain the thing. So I really just wanted to show that A, I wanted to get a little bit of chess on the board before I do the theoretical bit, and B, I think it's quite a nice example of an early exchange sack, but this exchange sack's very much with a view to an attack rather than sort of positional compensation. I mean, there were some lines there which clearly are about positional compensation, particularly if black has to give up the dark square bishop. Then you'll see that, you know, white's bishop pair and the bishop operating on the dark squares becomes a huge force. You know, I suppose some people, including knight takes g6, might say those things should be described as a combination rather than a sacrifice. I'm inclined to think that one of the things I want to sort of suggest today is that the kind of division you often see between positional sacrifices and attacking sacrifices, that kind of thing, I think that's a little bit overdone. I think the elements of positional play are often also the elements that bring about a strong attack. And you know, trying to form divisions between these things is not always a good thing. There are lots of books which are all about positional sacrifices, but they include some things which look to me more like attacks, and I don't really see a need to divide those two. I think it's healthy to think of them in terms of perhaps short-term compensation and long-term compensation. And I think that will capture most of what is actually helpful. Okay. So let me unshare again for a moment and just talk to Cam for a minute. So I assume people are happy to hear a little bit of my thoughts on the theory of exchange sacrifices. So, well, I'll tell you the period when I got really interested in the sort of theoretical side of it. I think one of the big things was John Watson's book, John Watson's Secrets of Modern Chess Strategy. Can I just ask how many people know that? I'm sort of interested how far it filtered through into. Is that a hand from John? And from James, yes.
Yeah.
Others?
No.
And Mike Gunn put his hand up as well.
Did he? Okay. That's interesting, because I see that as, I thought that was a marvelous book. So basically, John Watson was looking at the development of chess ideas since Nimzowitsch. He sort of took Nimzowitsch to be one of the big kind of theoretical leaps forward. Thank you, James. Good to know. yeah, he took that as one of the big kind of, Nimzowitsch is one of the very big figures in chess thinking, and he looked at basically what had changed in chess since Nimzowitsch. And, you know, he's thinking an awful lot about minor pieces. He says that he thinks a more sophisticated way of thinking about minor pieces is probably one of the biggest things that defines chess in the modern era. But he also very specifically says the single biggest change in chess since Nimzowicz's time is how ready players are to consider sacrificing the exchange. The exchange sacrifice, giving up rooks for minor pieces, he reckons is the single biggest change. And I think that's probably true. I mean, he basically, his book won me over on a lot. His book, actually, I was quite pleased with it because it said a lot of things I was already kind of thinking at the time. And obviously, we're always a bit more receptive to ideas that we already like. But it's sort of, yeah, it kind of was quite persuasive as well. I really have come to the view that exchange sacks were the biggest change from the earlier period. And, you know, then some people sort of went even further in their account, like Jonathan Rowson. By the way, how many people read Jonathan's either his Seven Deadly Chess Sins or Chess for Zebras?
I've read his Every Move Counts book, but none of his chess books.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Every Move Counts. Which is that? That's
It's
I
a new
was
one.
back to afterwards. It's basically I think I've got 64 moves that count. It's basically a sort of series of short essays on chess-related subjects and more of a philosophical bent, shall we say?
Oh, okay. Because I mean, obviously, he's done that again with his recent book, which is, you know, The Moves That Matter or whatever.
Oh, that was it. Sorry, that was it. Yeah,
oh, that's the one. Oh, that one. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
Okay, that's it. Okay, yeah.
I just got
Right.
the title wrong. That's
Okay. Yeah. No, that's definitely philosophical and sort of tangentially about chess as well. No, it's chess related. It's true. But no, in Chess for Zebras, Jonathan Rowson said something which I still think is slightly shocking. He said he thought that at grandmaster level, people now pretty much made exchange sacrifices the same way they would exchange a bishop for a knight. He said he thought that, you know, people are weighing up the sort of individual value of the piece in the specific position, and the kind of prejudice that a rook is worth overall more, has overall more value than a bishop, is almost gone. And so people are just basically they're sacrificing the exchange really, I would say, fairly lightly from that description of it. You know, it's that people are very aware of the thing. Yes, James.
There's an interview with Larson in Hugh Alexander's book, A Book of Chess, and in it, Larson sort of not loses his temper, but he got excited and said, well, just think Alekhine would never have seen an exchange sacrifice on c3 in a Sicilian.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I'll just leave that to hover in the air, because Alexander, perhaps understandably, didn't say you're wrong, but subsequently that statement has been unhorsed, and somebody said, oh, don't be so ridiculous. I can't remember, typical, I can't remember who said it, but the fact remains that the very fact they brought the point up, I mean, from my own point of view, I would do that in a dragon, either because I've seen it before, but also because you get a double pawn and it's obvious what the compensation is, except whereas what you were doing was analytical, in as much you would only go to b5, you know, not for your holidays, but because you were going to come across to d5 and take the bishop. But at my level, I would be, all my games, I'd be worried that I just mess it up because I would miscalculate, not understand.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. Can I go now?
No, you can't go. But yes, I mean, now you've brought up rook takes c3 as a sacrifice in the Sicilian, presumably. I mean, I think there are two. It's probably fair to say there's a bit of a difference between rook takes c3 in the Sicilian when White's castle queenside, and the many rook takes c3s which now happen when White's castle kingside, and there's none of the, you know, part of the, in the dragon, part of the thing is serious exposure to the king, right? Whereas all those ones where Black takes on c3 when White's king is safely tucked away on the queen on the king side, those have a much more sort of sophisticated positional narrative going on behind them if they're justified. And you know, there's lots of positions where they look a little bit tempting, but you don't need to look too deeply to see they're not that great.
No.
But I mean, of course, how far things have moved on. Is anyone aware of the game Movsesian against Kasparov, where Movsesian allowed a rook takes c3 sacrifice in the Sicilian when he'd castled queenside? And Garry Kasparov, who's obviously notable for his annotations not tending to take prisoners, said that basically allowing this reflected a complete lack of chess culture, which went down very well with Movsesian. But, you know, people have sort of lined up on one side or the other. But, you know, rook takes c3 sacrifices against the castle king on the queen side now, I think, probably happen. Yeah, as you say, they happen throughout at all levels. Yeah, I think it's a reasonably well-known mechanism. Okay, so yeah, so what I was saying was that yeah, so Jonathan Rowson was implying that Grandmaster chess had become, you know, hardly even a thing. And by the way, I don't know if any of you, probably not, have seen there's a recent video about exchange sacrifices by Matthias Bartel on Chess24, and he basically says that he thinks it would be far more useful for people to think of them not as exchange sacrifices, but as just another form of exchange. So basically a sort of a take on Jonathan Rowson's thing with a more psychological bent, saying if we can only change the mindset from we're giving, he said, when you say sacrifice, people kind of think of it as something dramatic, think of it as something, you know, which only happens on rare occasions. So he's again trying to sort of normalize the idea. But I must say, I'm sort of, I take a view somewhere in the middle. So I have Irva's words in the back of my mind. How many people grew up on Irva and Kramer's middle game books?
Yeah, read that as a teenager.
Yeah. I mean, these were wonderful things. And at the time Irva was writing, I think exchange sacrifices were just kind of taking off. I can't remember when the book was exactly produced, but I suspect it.
1960?
Yeah, so we'd had the sort of 1950s with lots of exchange sacrifices in the King's Indian, helping to make the King's Indian respectable. And, you know, I think they'd taken off quite a lot. And Irva sort of very wisely at the end says, you know, all these people have suddenly become more willing to give up a rook for a bishop or a rook for a knight, but be in no doubt. In the normal circumstance, a rook is much stronger than a bishop, much stronger than a knight, and you need some very clear compensation. And I think you need to be able to describe your compensation. You need to know what you're doing. So nonetheless, the way I like to think of it, let me put a way of trying to think about. Actually, can I ask a question at this point? I mean, they're talking about exchange sacrifices as being similar to exchanges, which I think can be a little bit risky if you go the whole hog and say, okay, I kind of think that there are so many occasions where rooks are not worth more than bishops that we'll sort of hardly count them as more in our heads. I think if you kind of think of it as exchange in that stuff, it's a bit dangerous. But if you're considering, can I just ask a question? If you're considering exchanging pieces, what goes on in your head? What things do you think about? So I'm not thinking about sacrifices now. I'm thinking of equal exchanges of pieces. So bishop for knight, or knight for bishop, or knight for knight, bishop for bishop. In those kind of situations, what tends to go through your head when making those kind of exchanges? I think it's quite a useful checklist you can have. But if anyone wants to, please chip in at that point. What do you?
Well, if his piece is better than my piece, then it's generally a good exchange. If he's got a very strong knight dominating the center of the board, then I'll use a bishop to kill it if I can.
Okay, so that's definitely part of it. So that would be the relative value of the two pieces being exchanged.
Yes.
Yeah, that is obviously and definitely a part of it, but I think it's important for that to be only a part of it, if you see what I mean. So that would be, yeah, that would be the first thing, I think, the relative value of the two pieces being exchanged. Other things you might think about?
Is there any
So
structural damage.
Yeah, structural damage,
Yeah,
absolutely. Structural damage, and also, I think also whether different structures would affect the way you think about that exchange. So, you know, it may be that in position with one structure, the exchange makes sense, but as soon as the structure gets modified, whether through the exchange or likely to happen shortly afterwards, that sort of affects the balance of the exchange. So yeah, structural damage, definitely. Any other things?
Are you going to incrementally improve your position in some way?
Yes, I suppose so, but slightly more specifically, I mean, how I like to think of it is that, I mean, I think it's useful to think about, particularly in the case of the bishop pair, that if you exchange one bishop, I think it tends to have a lot of impact on the power of the other bishop. There's another thing Jonathan Rowson talks about. He talks about the sort of, the bishop pair being the kind of natural thing, and a single bishop being a kind of lonely on its own without its partner, and somehow not doing the equivalent work. Now, I think it's quite a complicated concept, but I think it's worth always thinking about how the piece exchange affects the other pieces, and very closely related to that is how it affects the sort of dynamism of your position. I think so there was one other thing I wanted to say in that regard, which was, I think the other thing is to think about whether any piece is performing an incredibly critical job. That's the kind of basis on which I would come by the sacrifice in the game we already saw. The rook b5 takes d5. I've just sort of decided that bishop on d5, as well as being a good piece, it's got a critical role defending the pawn on e6. And you could argue that's kind of part of the, that's part of the, is it a good piece or not? But I think it's quite useful to separate some of these things out when you're thinking, and it makes it a little bit easier to figure out, is it a good piece in general, but is it doing some really important job right now, which I'm really going to miss if it's not there? I just want to sort of float those ideas and move on to look at a few more positions with those.
What about the phase of the game?
Sorry?
What about the phase of the game? I mean, if it's like, I would be more inclined to take a pawn during end game more than.
Absolutely. No, sorry, that was the next thing I was going to say, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the other thing underlying, and one of the reasons I like that kind of Erva's caveat that, don't forget rooks are, in many positions, rooks are going to be better than minor pieces. There's a kind of dynamic about this through the game, because bishops and knights can quite often match rooks in the middle game, but rooks, as we know, I think, people become aware from quite an early stage in chess that rooks are the pieces above all which improve as the game goes on. I mean, that's why we kind of develop them last, because they don't naturally come out early. We wait and see where the position falls and where they're going to be super effective. So yes, the phase of the game is very important, and the further through the game you get, the better the rooks. I mean, think about it. One of the thoughts which, when I'm thinking about, getting excited about exchange sacrifices, one of the thought that sort of nags at the back of my head is that when we get to the end game, there are tons and tons of positions in which a rook is probably as good as two pieces. If there are passed pawns, if there's some counterplay, rooks tend to come into their own in the end game against two pieces. So you need to be incredibly careful if you're making an exchange sacrifice about the possibility that the position is going to be simplified. So that all, yes, please.
Not only rooks, pawns. I mean, if you think about it, we'll give up a pawn in the opening, but no one's going to give a pawn in the end game because they become more valuable.
Yeah, mostly not. Absolutely. Pawns become more valuable too. Yeah, that's true. That is true. But I mean, but on the other hand, with exchange sacrifices, you're very often getting a pawn as compensation for the exchange sacrifice. And I think it's probably true to say that as the game goes on, the extent to which the rooks get better and better probably outweighs the extent to which the pawn gets better in many cases. I mean, really, it's a pretty fair bet that when you're, okay, there's one more thought I want to say. I think that in general, people think about exchange sacrifices, as I've done so far, an awful lot by thinking about the minor pieces. And it's worth factoring in rooks into the equation as much as possible as well. So if you look at most of the successful exchange sacrifices, there aren't many open files on the board. And if there aren't many entry squares on those open files. So containing the rooks is an incredibly important part of the equation, and one which I think, sometimes maybe I'm describing my own fault as a general fault here, but I think so much in terms of the minor pieces that I sometimes, sort of forget that the rooks are playing a big role in all this too. So now if I'm thinking about an exchange sacrifice, almost the first thing I look for is open files, possibilities for the rooks, that sort of thing. I'm trying to correct my natural fault in this regard. Okay, let's look at some more positions and see how this all fits in. I'm conscious of the fact that I've prepared quite a few examples, and several of them, I think we're not going to have time for all of them. So I'm kind of pruning in my mind at this point. I did want to have one example. I'll come back to that. Okay. Can I just say,
Peter, sorry, just to give you some idea of the kind of scheduling, we traditionally have a pause at say nine or some convenient time for about 5 minutes. So
that sounds very well.
If that fits in with what you've got, that's my, yeah.
Well, I mean, I can always go 5 minutes over anyway, but I mean, it's that would fit in very well anyway, because I'll probably need a break at that point.
Sure.
Okay, but I will move on. So yeah, can I just take you just to reflect on a couple of the classic exchange sacrifices which people probably know, before I try and look at a couple of positions which you may or may not have seen before. But so probably the most famous exchange sacrifices of all come from Petrosian. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, there was an interview where he said, "I'd like to sacrifice rooks." In his book, Vasilyev's book on Petrosian, I think.
Yes, I mean it's pretty clear he does this with very little reluctance at all. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I mean, the one against Reshevsky, I'd be interested in knowing how familiar this is to people. But first, I will share the screen and give you a better chance of saying.
What event is it?
I'm not going to analyze this. I don't know even. I'm not even totally convinced how well it stands up to engine scrutiny. The engine sort of accepts bits of it and not others, but it's not really the main point. The point is the idea, and the idea is to try and fit it in with some of what I just said. Do many people know what Petrosian played in this position?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this most remarkable, I mean, my exchange sacrifice that I showed earlier, we had the rook sort of chasing the bishop in an undignified fashion. Now it sort of puts itself in its teeth completely voluntarily, rook to e6. And okay, I mean, the first thing to say about this, it clearly doesn't force the bishop to take, but it works incredibly well as a move just from the point of view of organizing black's pieces. So black gets this idea of knight going from e7 to d5. So if we look in terms of black's piece, so in terms of what I said about how an exchange not only is based on those two pieces, but on the others, the first thing to say here is that the knight on c6 is hugely improved by this sacrifice, but also the bishop on g6, because I think it's true in almost any position that if one side's bishop gets exchanged off, then the opposing side's bishop, which operates on those colored squares, necessarily improves. I think it's useful, again, to think about it if you think about opposite colored bishop positions, we know that bishops become very, very dangerous in the middle game when the opponent doesn't have a bishop of that color. And essentially, in many of these exchange sacrifices, we're doing just the same thing. We're producing a position with opposite colored bishops and possibly with another bishop as well. But you get the benefits of the opposite colored bishops. And the fact that there's another bishop of the same color doesn't actually alter that dynamic. I think you get those benefits. So the bishop on g6 is improved, the knight on c6 is improved. And although, I mean, the rook on e7 versus the bishop on g4 is a tough one, I think if you look at those side benefits, it becomes much easier to understand the sacrifice. And incidentally, going back to Jonathan Rowson again, the point I'd make very strongly is that the exchange of this bishop on g4, oops, sorry, I just clicked the wrong square. The exchange of the bishop on g4 does very bad damage to the prospects of the bishop on b2. Once again, this is the bishop pair working well together, not because it's less easy to explain exactly how that sort of works here, because the bishop on b2's prospects don't look that amazing in either case. But the reason Petrosian played this sacrifice when he did, apart from, as James pointed out, his love of doing these things, is that white is basically threatening to play e6. If you play e6, although it's going to take a little bit of time to relocate it, I think it performs wonders for the bishop on b2 as well. So I think the only way to understand these sacrifices really is to look at every piece in the position and see how black's are all improved and white's remaining pieces are getting worse. And that gives you some idea of how this can justify a sacrifice of a rook for bishop with no pawns changing hands and with no, obvious dynamic prospects for black. I mean, the knight on d5 is a handy piece, but it's not exactly putting white under threat. So I just wanted to talk about that in those. And again, just one more Petrosian one, because they are rather classics. How many people also know this position? So this one I'm going to discuss less in terms of the pieces overall and more in terms of the dynamics. I think here it's about the overall dynamic is really understanding that black has one essential plan and one plan only.
Position, Peter.
You haven't
Sorry?
noticed the position.
Oh, sorry.
You might need to
I'm really
load.
bad at that. I do that with my pupils sometimes as well.
You can do load next game perhaps.
No, I think it's just I've got them all sort of ready placed for sharing. I just need to.
Okay.
If I'm being silly. Okay. So in this position, it's not so much about the pieces. It's much more about the dynamics of the position, which is that the sort of dynamic opportunities for black revolve entirely around one pawn break. And it's an incredibly dangerous pawn break. I mean, black is basically threatening. White is holding back the e4 pawn push only by the pressure he's putting on f4. So essentially, black is threatening rook a to f6, followed by e4. And I think it's fair to say that white's position suddenly looks a hopeless mess of terrible coordination. So that, as well as Petrosian's natural propensity to give up rooks, led him to the solution bishop f3, which incidentally, looks like it's just asking for e4, but his plan is to meet e4 with queen d4. And whilst that isn't quite as good for black, I don't think, as some early commentators suggested, it's pretty decent as a defense for white. It's clear that white's slightly worse in this position. We're looking here, I think many of Petrosian's greatest exchange sacks were essentially defensive.
Ooh.
Bishop f3. Black played rook f6, so he's now actually probably trying to renew the threat of e4. And here white played, do people know what white played here? The incredibly calm rook to e1. And could look a little bit like a beginner's error, missing fork on d3. And of course, black, now he's pretty much stopping the e4 break. And if the e4 break doesn't happen, think about what that does to the rooks on the f file. It essentially removes their purpose. So black has to kind of cash in with something. So he fits in with Petrosian's plans by forking the rooks. Petrosian just calmly moves, allows knight takes e1, queen takes, and basically black defends the pawn on e5. Petrosian plays c5. And at this point, his comment is, if you fiddle around with this position, I'm not sure he used the term fiddle around, but you know what I mean. If you play around with this position, you very quickly realize that the material advantage is completely meaningless. And what we have here is a situation where there are no open files with any entry points. So, black has a G file to play with, but white's probably coming with knight e4, which black will probably have to take off, at which point, the bishop on f3 completely covers the G file. And I think it's true. I don't want to analyze this. Just take a little look and think about it. I think there's basically no way for black to make progress. And on that basis, we can say that, black's material advantage is meaningless. The dynamism from his position has been completely removed by trading off the piece which was most supporting his plan in exchange for one which really didn't have any impact on it at all. So this is I think these, I just wanted to put those in because I think they kind of reflect a little bit on what I was saying in terms of looking at the other aspects of the position than just the pieces which are being traded. In some cases, it'll be the direct effect on the other pieces. In some cases, it'll just be the effect on kind of planning, dynamism, the ability to break through, that kind of thing. I think this one's quite instructive as well. This is Petrosian white against Gligorich, I believe. Okay, do you think maybe we might take the 5-minute break now? Because actually I could kind of use a comfort break and rather than get, the next example is going to be slightly longer. So rather than get involved in that, I'm inclined to do it now if that's okay.
Do you want to put the position on the screen, Peter? And then
that's an idea. Yes.
Put it on the screen, and then we can some of us can think about it in the break.
Of course. I mean, the next position is actually it's one that there maybe some people know it as well. I mean, I wanted to do some modern examples, but for one or two things I wanted to explain, the classics actually seem to do the job best. So this one is sort of a historical one as well, but I do think it makes a very interesting point in relation to what I was saying just now. We're not quite at the exchange sacrifice point yet. I was going to take you from a few moves before, but I can, if you want something to think about during the break, I could take you to the point where this is, I don't know if people know, this is Botvinnik Portish. I could take you to the point where Portish made his error of judgment, if you like.
Still seeing the previous game.
Sorry. You may have to tell me that every time.
From Monaco 68.
Yes, thank you, James. If the
I didn't- it
speaker is
wasn't me that
hoping
said
that people
that,
haven't
someone
seen it,
else.
those kind of details are very off-putting. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, actually, I don't think Botvinnik actually beat Portish that often, did he?
Ooh. Whoa.
There's a question. Anyway,
Whoa.
no 68. You're quite right.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just talk through the next couple of moves and then I'll take the break. So it's a sort of, as you can see, a kind of reverse dragon. And as usual in the reverse dragon, black doesn't try to checkmate white because it doesn't really work a tempo down. He's playing like a sort of slow development dragon, as people do. White played knight a4. Oops. Oh dear, it's doing its thing where it doesn't want to move. Yeah, knight a4. With the classic dragon, classic dragon ideas of trying to use the c5 square as it is here, c4 square as it is when it's black. Sometimes bishop to c5, sometimes knight c5, depending on circumstance. Black was having none of it and traded this off. And then played bishop to d5, which looks like a sensible move competing for the diagonal. And white simply built on the c file. Do many people know this game, by the way? I think the point it makes is valid anyway, but if too many people knew it, it would be I'd be slightly concerned. Okay, so white played rook fc1. Black prepared to defend the e-pawn in a more sort of secure manner. Rook c2, just building pressure. Bishop f8, and now rook ac1. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, for a man who studied chess sort of 7-8 hours a day, supposedly, this is not one of the best opening positions that Portish ever reached. White's pressure on the c-file is not that obvious how it's going to break through, but moves like queen b5 can be quite awkward. I think if the light square bishops become exchanged with something like knight d2 to e4, then white has some ideas based on the weakened queen side as well. I think black's position is a little bit unpleasant. And basically, Portish came to the conclusion that he didn't like his knight being on c6. So and you can see that if black could play the moves sort of knight to b8 and pawn to c6, then his position would stabilize considerably. White's put all his eggs in a kind of attacking on the c-file basket. And if black can remove that target on the c-file, then black's position would improve quite a lot. So black's next move, I think, is very ambitious, and it turned out to be a serious error of judgment. But you can sort of see what motivated it, I hope. Black played knight to b8. And now there probably won't be any prizes for guessing that here white came up with an exchange sacrifice, but the particular exchange sacrifice he came up with is very well worth having a think about. So shall I leave you with that thought and take my break?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, 5 minutes then.
Okay.
Or roughly, anyway.
Roughly, yeah.
Approximately.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is he going to retrieve the bishop? It's the b7 on pre. That's not it. So it must be the bishop. It must be the bishop.
Anybody around?
Yeah, I'm still here. So.
don't see the. D2 maybe. Oh, D4.
So, John, did you see who won the over 65s British Championship?
Roger de Coverley.
Yes, Roger de Coverley.
Oh, nice one. Yeah.
And Phil Stimpson was third, I think.
Phil Stimpson did very well. Both tricky players. So does White play rook takes c7 here and then allow bishop c6?
Presumably.
Yeah, and then it's a question of which rook do you sacrifice, isn't it?
Yep.
Or you might even, don't know whether or not you would even play bishop b6 instead. They got knight d7, rook b6.
No, the bishop's threatening the queen after bishop
right,
c6.
Yeah.
So he plays rook 7 takes c6 and then knight takes, and then white knight becomes really strong.
I think there was a question about which exchange sacrifice, which leads you to think rook c1 takes c6 might be a move as well.
Or doesn't that make the rook on c7 very vulnerable?
It does.
Oh no,
but,
I see. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. It's a question of how we follow up, you know? So,
yeah.
So what are we saying here? Rook c7, knight c6, rook c6. Is that the consensus?
No, it's.
I'm thinking if you play rook, if you play that sequence, rook c7, knight c6, does White have the move bishop b6? Bishop b6 there. If
does White have rook takes b7?
Yeah, you've got no. That's just, I can't see how you're capturing back.
So I think after rook takes c7, black plays bishop c6.
Yeah, and then it's a question: do you play rook on c1 takes c6 and bishop b6?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
This is a bit like a game between John Nunn and Surtees at Basingstoke, where Surtees stopped one of the sacrifices. So Nunn played it anyway, and then regrouped the rook again, smashed it along the 7th rank. And we've been enjoying it ever since.
So that was in Irving Chernev's Golden Dozen, I think, wasn't it?
What was?
That Nunn Surtees game.
It was from Basingstoke. I don't think Irving Chernev ever quoted any games, but.
So, James, did you know that I once won the Silver Rook Trophy at Basingstoke Chess Club?
No.
Yes.
In what year was that?
Paul's been dining out on that for years, actually.
19...
I bet you wish you still had the Silver Rook to melt it down.
1969.
Really?
Yeah, and my name's on there.
Well, did you live in Basingstoke, or you must?
I lived in Tadley.
Oh, right.
I was a student apprentice at AWRE.
Oh, right. Yes, we've still got some of those. I work at BCOT, and they're more trouble than they're worth. But well, it's not just them. It's the whole regime there is different. You know, they are not reciprocal. They are not an employer.
No. So I knew Ken Wilde very well.
Yes, dear Ken. Yes, who died not so long ago.
That's right.
And presumably you knew David Bryden, did you?
No, David Harrison I knew.
All right. Did you know Colin Davison?
He was Doctor Who, wasn't he?
Well,
no, I don't think so.
Well, there was a Basingstoke player. Philip might be able to help us here. Hang on. No, he's very strong. Ewart Smith told me about him, but he still plays. He played in the over 60s.
Before my time, James.
Oh, right. I'm surprised because isn't your time before mine? Weren't you? Did you go and play when the club wasn't at Sherborne Road?
No, I've always been to Sherborne Road.
Oh, right. Okay. Because I first went there in 75.
Where was it before Sherborne Road then, James?
Well, my memory's letting me down. I can picture the place. It's very nice. I think it's up at Chin. It's a Georgian house.
Really?
Yes, it is. It's still there, but it must be in private ownership now.
Where's that? Clifton Road or something?
Forgive me, I'm not, for someone that's lived in Basingstoke for 20 years, I'm still a new boy here. I'd have to look it up. I know Stan Mitchell and probably Frank Bonzi and Dick would have played there, maybe Dave Graham. Chute House. That's it, Chute House.
Wow.
What are we saying? Rook takes c7.
Well, yeah, bishop c6. Rook 7 takes c6, what I would play, but he may have played rook 1 takes c6. Leaving his...
Oh, that makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
After rook,
not many.
After rook 1 c6, he has to take with the pawn, doesn't he? Because if he takes with the knight, then we just take on b7.
You could take on b7, yes. If he takes...
I don't see what we're doing if he takes with the pawn.
Well, you can play bishop to b6.
Yeah, that's about all there is, isn't there?
No, you can. Well, you can also play rook b7.
What I thought was why I mentioned that game of Mike Surtees was that I thought Botvinnik took on c7 and then took on f7. This is memory, not analysis.
Yeah.
I can go and look, I suppose, and just spoil it.
No, it's
no, exactly. That's spoiling.
That's an interesting idea, actually.
Yeah, if you've got a full ops like knight g5 and queen c4, if you
Honestly,
idea,
it's a nice idea if it works, but you know, after the summer, says Tal, comes the winter.
So what was the idea? The idea was to take on c7, bishop c6, and then...
Well, I'm trying to remember...
And exchange sacrifice on c6.
Yeah, I'm trying to justify, yeah.
Well, definitely, which rook? That's the question.
Oh, yes, I see what you mean. Yeah, no.
It might be the c1 rook, I think.
With what intention? So, yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that White is better in the position anyway, so could probably sacrifice the exchange with reasonable compensation, even if he played rook 7 takes c6. But clearly the more ambitious one is to take with the back rook and keep your rook on the 7th rank, or do something with your rook on the 7th rank. So the suggestion was what? To take here?
Yeah.
Probably b takes. Well, b takes is certainly what was played. And then?
Well, we were looking at bishop c6, a bishop b6, or rook b7, or possibly rook takes f7.
Yeah, okay. And what do you think about rook takes f7?
Well, again, you've got knight g5 check, and you've got a queen c4 check. You've got all sorts. It's quite promising.
Yeah, no, I think it is quite promising. I mean, okay, there's some nice variations, of course, but the point, I'll tell you at the end the reason I selected this. But yes, rook takes f7 actually works and was played. And if black takes, what's the sort of clinical way of doing this?
Queen c4 check.
Yes, queen c4 check is better than knight g5. I think knight g5 check might allow black. I mean, black's probably in grave danger anyway, but some respite trying to run to the queen side with king e7. Queen c4 keeps the king firmly on the king side, because king e7 then isn't possible, of course. We're keeping the g5 square clear for the bishop. So black would have to go king g6. It's the only move that doesn't immediately lose a queen. And then I imagine white has more than one way of doing this, but there's one way which is clearly the strongest, I think.
H4 check.
H4 check is probably pretty good, but I'm not sure what the killer blow is after king f6. As I say, I can well believe that there are ways of making this very unpleasant for black, but I'm not sure if that's not the quickest knockout, I don't think.
Is it queen f7?
Sorry, which moment?
Before knight. Oh, no, you can't, sorry.
Yeah.
I wish it was. That would be
G4.
That would be
yes, queen
impressive.
G4. This is the precise way to do it, because then when then after king f7, well, you tell me what's changed.
Well, you're covering e6, aren't you? So knight g5
Yeah,
check.
now
is,
knight g5 check is an absolute killer because king e7 is mate immediately, and king f6 is mate. Oops, almost immediately.
Well, can't you run in the hole?
What hole?
Oh, g8.
Oh well, one moment. Queen f3 check, I think, and here, and then queen e6, queen f7, and knight
What's your
e6
uncle?
check. And it's either mate or winning the queen. It may well be both.
Or neither if he resigned.
Or neither if he resigned. Yeah.
I just had to say that. But
well, I mean, occasionally people do get frustrated when their opponent resigns, but mostly it's seen as a reasonable victory. And if he goes back, then of course queen c4 again is much more successful than it was first time around, because there are no decent squares to escape to, and we can look forward to a classic smothered mate.
Yep.
As well as winning the queen, unless he resigns, of course. Okay, so what I like about this, from the point of view of what I was saying before, I think that you could easily classify this as a position in which the bishop on d5 is actually, well, two things I want to say. The bishop on d5 is actually performing a vital role of defending the light squares on the king side, but that it's somehow quite easy to overlook that in the context of all else that's going on. And I would also claim that this position here has what I was describing earlier, all the hallmarks of a kind of opposite colored bishop position, only white actually has the full pair of bishops, but the g2 bishop is likely to play a very serious role in the attack. It didn't play a role in that line, but it does in the game, as I'll show you in a moment. And, you know, I really think this is a position where thinking of it in terms of the pieces that are left and thinking of it in terms of how we would think about opposite colored bishops is a very good way of framing your thoughts about an exchange sacrifice. So after rook f7, black actually played h6, and I'm rather glad that he did, because it led to some more beautiful variations. Okay, I mean, white played now the more prosaic rook b7. I guess that if queen c4 here, then queen d5 staved off disaster for a while. So rook b7. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the engine was telling me that knight g5 was a good move. It may well have done. I mean, in fact, it seems to me in this position, given what we know about and what we said earlier about phases of the game and exchange sacrifices, black could have done worse than playing queen e6, knight takes e5, queen takes c4. I mean, it's a hopeless ending, despite everything we said about phases of the game, because we have a couple of pawns. Black has chronic weaknesses, and he's still vulnerable to attack on the light squares, even without queens on the board. I don't think there's much doubt about that. Nonetheless, what happened was even worse. King h8. And now you might have some fun seeing how, trying to work out how Botvinnik finished this off. These are the variations where what I said about opposite colored bishops may begin to look a little bit more relevant, I think.
Does bishop h6 work?
Do you mean bishop h3?
I was looking at.
Oh, sorry, bishop takes h6. Oh, heavens. Sorry. Oh, it may do. But queen takes b7 would be, you know, I always sort of.
What about?
I always pick a move I would start looking at first.
Queen f7.
Queen f7 also looks moderately scary, doesn't it?
Because then you're threatening bishop takes h6 and
Yep.
mate on h7.
That does look pretty good. I think that would be time for me to bail out to try and get an ending again with Queen e6, probably. And all the concerns I had about it before are still relevant, but I suspect, yeah, that looks very strong to me, but I think white can do even better.
How about knight h4?
Exactly. Exactly. It's still all about those light squares, which are no longer being defended by the bishop we sacked for. And here we go, knight h4.
Followed by bishop e4.
Well, yes, that's right. It's important for my narrative to have bishop e4 in there, because I really do want to show that it has the hallmarks of an opposite color bishop position. Black actually took the rook this time. You never know really whether that's because he couldn't see any other defense or because he wanted to get home early, but he took the rook.
They were in Monaco. It's rather nice there.
Well, I imagine, yes, by home, I mean away from the chessboard. I'm sure there's plenty of pleasant enough things to do rather than defend this position. So knight g6 check, king h7, and now
Bishop e4.
bishop e4, bishop d6. Again, I'm quite glad he played bishop d6 because it makes the ending even prettier.
Knight f8 check.
I was looking at knight.
After knight f8 check, king h8, other than torturing me with the fact that you can Soviet style just repeat the position and I can't do anything about that at all.
Knight e7 check, followed by queen g8.
I think that's one way not to. I think that's one way to end up with only a perpetual check, isn't it? It's so very, very tempting. But
I see. Yes, you're right.
I think that is. I've sort of.
Well done, Peter, for knowing that.
I always look at these things and I always like that illusion, but I think that's just a perpetual check. It's a very pretty one. I once played an incredibly beautiful combination to get a perpetual check when I was winning because I only had a few seconds on the clock. And of course, if you look on ChessBase, it looks like I just converted a beautiful position into a draw, an immediate draw for the sake of the aesthetics, but I didn't do that. It was, and this is a lovely way of doing that, but I think that's all it does. No, so another route for the knight to play a role in the attack, I think.
Take on e5.
Yeah, take on e5, that's right. So then, oh, sorry. Then I assume that king h8 loses, then it loses everything. It loses at least the queen, possibly more. It doesn't need to lose more, does it? We're happy with the queen. So black, understandably, in this position, after knight e5, played g6. And I'm taking this to the end, not because it's so relevant to exchange sacrifices, except that it flows naturally from what white did, but it is rather beautiful, I think.
Bishop g6 and bishop h6 check.
Exactly, bishop g6, king g7, and bishop takes h6 check. And yeah, as you can see, if black takes the bishop, he is losing the queen, and I think he may even be also getting mated, but that may be a fairly academic point from this point. I mean, there's various ways of doing it, including not even giving away the knight, just doing it like that and then taking the queen and you're hitting both rooks. So there you are. Black had had enough. But I hope the point is sort of made. It's about the pieces. It's about comparing the worth of the pieces, definitely. But it's the fact that the bishop is doing a slightly hidden role. I think it's quite difficult to foresee, if you haven't seen this before, quite how drastically black's white squares fall apart without that white square bishop. And it does resemble, from my point of view, various opposite color bishop attacks that I've seen. And suddenly, black can't make moves like h6 anymore because white has a light square bishop and black doesn't. It's pretty much as simple as that. So I think it's a very clean example. And obviously it's an unusually clean example for a game at that level to end up with a sort of vicious mating attack like that, which I hope adds to the entertainment. But I'm rather fond of that one. I think it makes the point quite well. Okay, I'm going to remember to stop sharing this time and then reshare the next example, which is progress, in a sense. Okay, let me show you one more of my, oh, it doesn't seem to be appearing, so I better go chase it. There's various positions I could show, but I think I'll go for this. Oh God, sorry, I've gone and done it with. I'm not sharing yet, am I? Oh, that is good. I'm not yet sharing. That's good because I momentarily left the notation on there, which would give away the solution somewhat. So let me just get to the key position. This is a game I actually watched live, which is one of the reasons it made quite an impression. So as you can probably see,
no, we can't.
We can't.
No, as you can probably see as soon as I share it, I was going to say. No, I was deliberately not sharing there for a moment. I was getting to the position without giving anything away with the notation.
I'm not giving anything away if we can't even see the position.
That's harsh. That's harsh. If the notation's there when I show you the position, then for people with a quick vision of these things, it could be bad news. Where's it gone? Here we go. Right. Oh,
I can see a picture of John, which is pretty inspiring.
I'm sure it is.
I doubt it.
Am I now sharing the position?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So this is Sultan Ribley, who I don't tend to associate with sort of smashing attacks and exciting sacrifices, possibly unfairly, playing white against Dorian Rogozenko. And in this position, well, I mean, black looks a little bit passive. He has some, you know, it's clearly some kind of G3 Grunfeld. Black could try to sort of play rook c8, knight c4 and make some sense of his offside knight on a5. But instead, he tried to force the issue by driving the white rook away from the defense of d5. And, well, we can reasonably quickly see that if the rook moves to d2 or d3 loses the exchange in a not very promising manner, I think, to bishop b5. And rook d2 just is a move white would prefer not to have to play because he would quite like to play with his pieces and that blocks them in. So from the point of view of trying to win the d5 pawn, this appears to make quite a lot of sense. And I just want to see how much you can, it's an interesting position because I think the exchange set that white plays is interesting in itself, but what you need to calculate by way of an attempt for black to, you know, get his best prospects of doing something about it is quite interesting too. So take a little look at this and see what you come up with.
Bishop g5.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest bishop g5 actually.
Yeah, bishop g5 is one definite possibility, and I guess okay. So bishop g5, I would meet by taking on d1, of course, before it decides to run away. Rook takes d1, and then I would need to think a little bit. So there's rook e8, possibly f6, although it's a move you make with a slightly heavy heart. And those are the only two moves that cover. Oh no, there's also bishop f6, but again, that's not ideal, although then it's going to come down very much to a battle between white's d pawn and whether or not having black's offside knight, you know, in a position after bishop f6 takes, if black could maneuver that knight quickly to d6, then black would be clearly better, probably winning.
Doesn't b4 win the knight?
Oh, it may well do. Okay, b4 wins the knight. So yeah, so that's a good line. So okay, in that, if b4 is winning the knight, then we'd better go f6 and take something back for it.
Don't think
Queen e6 looks good.
Does it? It looks.
I always like checks.
It might be mate.
It might be.
Who said that? Patzer sees a check, plays a check.
That was Bobby Fischer, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
What about the other one? Was the other one Fischer as well?
Never miss a. I think it was Blackburn.
Yeah, I think it might be. Yeah, I think you're right, James. Never miss a check.
I frequently am, actually.
Never miss a check. It might be mate.
Atrocious.
I said that about Robert Maxwell, actually.
I said that. Yeah, the bouncing check.
I don't know. This is a position with decent compensation, I think. But I wouldn't put it probably any higher than that unless you can come up with something really strong very quickly. What do you think?
Bishop F4.
Yeah, I'm just sort of pinning my hopes on being able to relocate my knight before it drops off. I think.
Which
B3.
Really, I'm kind of keen to go to D6 anyway. Am I going to be?
Well, you're chasing it to a better square, I think, with B3.
That would be the worry. Yeah, I don't know.
Well,
I mean, I would thought something like rook E1 might be more challenging because it, you know, it means that I can't. If I go to D6, then probably you can even play that position without queens, and there's some serious compensation because my knight's going to get dislodged again.
And the bishop on G7 is bug-eared.
Well, it is, but people win King's Indians with those kind of bishops all the time, don't they? Sort of. Now in the King's Indian, you get away with positional murder and still give checkmate, as far as I can see. I don't know. My basic view is that this is a reasonable exchange sack, but definitely not the best, and for a very specific reason, which we'll come to in a moment. Unless are people happy with that sort of assessment of it? I think that would be a very reasonable idea. And incidentally, I can very strongly imagine that would be what Rogozenko was expecting, because the move played just has a very unusual feel about it.
How about?
I guess the move played is B3.
No.
How about Bishop D2?
That's more than an exchange sack, I believe.
B3. I'd win back this bishop, but I think
Rook D4.
So Bishop D2, I think, would probably be met by takes, and then Rook C8, just trying to go Knight C4 as fast as possible. Yeah. Rook D4. Okay, so I prefer Rook D4 for lots of reasons. The first of which is that I would much rather give up my rook for this glorious bishop on the long diagonal than for this rather offside bishop on A4. It just feels to me like, in principle, that's a better decision. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that sort of frames a lot of my views on exchange sacks is do people know that exchange sack in the Grunfeld where basically White gives up a rook on White gives up the rook on A1 and gets to play queen takes A1, and Black has to play sort of F6 and all kinds of ugly moves.
Yeah.
The fact that that's been very heavily investigated and found to be okay for Black is another reason that I sort of have this slight caution about some exchange sacks, which I was trying to put earlier. So, you know, it's fairly clear from things like that simply getting the dark square bishop, having some control of that diagonal and making Black play some ugly positional moves isn't necessarily enough. But in this position, I think the additional thing which justifies the sacrifice are Black's really offside pieces. So the knight on A5, as we've already seen in one variation where I forgot the fact, is vulnerable to attack. And the bishop on B3 bishop on A4 went there for a very specific purpose. And having failed in that purpose, is now vulnerable to B3 and, you know, play on the long diagonal with tempo. But there's one line which Black can try, which might make all this a little bit, you know, that you can give all these sort of elegant positional descriptions, and there are often tactics in the way. And Black has a very interesting tactical idea after taking the rook. I mean, retreating the bishop doesn't make any sense. White's basically got a good rook D4 for free, and he's probably got B4 to follow up as well. Black has to take. But in this position, Black has an interesting fighting move, which I think is, again, worth trying to get you to find. It basically turns it from a matter of, you know, lots of positional counterplay into one of primarily calculation.
Well, is E5 a move here?
Absolutely, that's the move. Yeah, taking advantage of the fact that the knight is undefended, Black actually tries to, you know, one of the dangers to his position is White playing bishop H6 and queen E5. So he's trying to force the queen to E5 prematurely when he can then gain time with rook E8 and that kind of thing. Now, had Black played this move with modest intentions, he would have had some chance of survival. So after queen E5, Black has a good and well-motivated move, and he has another decent-looking move, which turns out not to be good enough. See if you can have a think about what would be the wiser of the alternatives.
Well, rook e8 and knight c4 both look good.
Excellent. Those are the two moves I was thinking about. So now all we need to do is choose between them. When you say good, do you mean good defensive tries, or you actually think black's doing fine?
I think black's doing quite well.
Oh, really? Okay.
Rook e8, yeah.
Okay. Well, rook e8 is what was played in the game.
I mean, you said you should make exchange sacrifices when there aren't open files. Well, black's got 2 open files he can play down.
No, he has, absolutely. For a while. Yes, he has. And there are threats of rook e1 and, you know, forcing the bishop back to f1, which would have unpleasant consequences. So what do you think White did here?
Is knight e6 a move?
Yeah, knight e6 certainly is a move. Knight
Oh,
e6.
Lord.
Threatening the queen, threatening mate, so we can pretty much agree black has to take it, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh.
Bishop h6 then.
Bishop h.
This is my favourite move of the combination, I think. Just because it's so beautifully thematic somehow.
Well, black is slightly weak on the dark squares.
He is. Black is suffering on the dark squares, but white has given up a whole rook. So.
We don't have to go to h6 immediately. Can we go g5 and then? I don't know. Is it finesse?
Maybe. I guess then the only
but then the
objection
queen
to that
goes
would
to
be
the
some
seventh
queen
rank.
b8. If I can challenge your queen with tempo, then maybe that's, you know, that kind of tempo might help the defense a little bit.
Maybe even knight c4 as well as a defensive move.
Well, yeah, that's a very sensible move.
Yeah, bishop h6, come on.
Okay.
It's root point.
So if I just defend those dark squares with my queen, you're going to win my knight, which is a bit annoying.
Correct.
But not necessarily true. I'm going to go queen e7 and hope for the best.
So why can't we play d5?
d6.
d6.
Because I'm going to use this moment for my knight c4 trick.
Cunning.
Essential, I would have thought. Yes. And, you know, it's not exactly pretty, but if my knight gets to f5, I might claim some survival chances.
Yeah.
Can't you just play queen d4?
Queen d4.
Yeah,
No,
you can.
knight
That's really what I meant by
Yeah.
I meant you win the bishop and my knight comes to f5 and I kick your bishop out, and I do, as was said earlier, have some serious open files for my rooks. I think this is still a battle, right?
Yeah.
So just think about these dark squares again. And think about black's main resources in the position.
e3.
Yes. Just take all those dark squares, because black is never threatening e takes d5. That's the beauty of the thing. Bishop takes d5 is always mating. So just put the bishop on the long diagonal.
Oh,
and,
yes,
and best of all, you cut out knight c4 at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I think the game finished up rook e7, bishop b2, queen f8. So he's preparing to run away with the king. d6, queen g7. And now I think there are probably lots of ways of doing this. And Ribley went for.
Did we miss queen h8?
Sorry, did we miss queen h8 here?
The king's
it's not mate. It's not mate.
Preparing to run away. I was hoping to run away like that. And okay, you grab some pawns, but.
Okay, doesn't quite work, does it?
Oh, well, I mean, it's not bad, but I think what he did is better.
Okay.
There's sort of there's a lot of fronts on which white's massacring him. So d6, queen g7. And then I think Ribley went for a fairly, I kind of like this retreat. I mean, you can win in various ways materially, but queen e2 and taking the rook is the simplest. And then after bishop c6, yeah, the next move is nice, I think.
Rook d1.
That is a nice move, but queen takes e7. That's what I'm hoping to do next against.
It's got b4 here, isn't
it? f4.
Oh, b4. Well, after b4, black's hoping to take on g2 and then go knight c6, I think.
Yeah.
And as I said before, none of it's pretty,
yes.
but
Yeah.
it's just a question of surviving a bit longer.
Well, can we just take on E5?
With the bishop.
Queen D2.
If you take on E5 with the bishop, I go queen takes E7, and again, white's doing well, but it's not.
Queen takes E5.
Oh, queen takes E5. Okay.
Well,
going into an end game now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, that is a very good end game. It's got to be said. That's perfectly reasonable. That's one of the ways to win for sure. I just liked what white did because it sort of has a. It's kind of thematic because of what we said earlier about the bishop pair and everything. He just kept the bishop pair.
Wow.
So he's threatening bishop E6 check and now bishop E5. And best of all, after black takes on E7, B4 really does come into its own because without the bishop exchange, there's no flight square for the knight. And basically that's it. And I rather like this game. It's a relatively little known game, but I was actually there at the time and it made, as you can imagine, quite a strong impression.
Were you playing in the tournament, Peter?
I was playing in the tournament, not particularly well, I'm afraid, although I did score 1.5 against the players in this game, but in general, I didn't play very well.
Did you beat Ripley?
No, I drew with Ripley. I beat Rogozenko.
All
right.
Very good.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it's a rather nice game. But again, I think so. This one is partly. I wanted to have this one partly because obviously we need examples of exchange sacks which weaken the dark squares are very nice. But I think it also introduces the idea that quite often that there's a tactical justification behind these exchange sacks as well. There's some calculation is needed. There's usually a mix of calculation and positional stuff going on. And here, the fact that rook e5 and rook e8 isn't forcing rook e1 check is absolutely pivotal to the possibility of doing sacrifice. And I was going to use that as a sort of introduction to another position with some tactical stuff going on, but I'm a little bit inclined, having said that I would take questions on any subject, to consider wrapping it up there. If people want to see another example, I'm happy to do it. But if they want to talk about anything else, I'm happy to do that as well.
Give us another example. Go on.
How did England get on against Hungary?
Let me just. This one is actually, if anyone's read my, anyone's read Chess Improvement, then they will have seen this one already. But I'm very fond of it. This is Korchneuer's Black. I don't know if people will have seen this. I mean, this I included because I'm not sure it's even usually thought of as an exchange sack. It's usually set as a kind of calculation problem or something like that. But what I like about it is that, well, have a little think about this. White just castled and black in this position played knight takes d4. And just have a little think if you can calculate the next few moves and see who you think emerges better from the tactics. And bear in mind the extra difficulty that would be involved had the task not been in the middle of a talk about exchange sacrifices. It's probably tricky enough anyway.
So maybe white goes bishop g5, knight d5.
Yeah, there's some dangerous-ish positional options like that. But if white went bishop g5, I think I would be keen to, well, one useful resource for black is obviously knight e6, but I think I would be very keen to get rid of knight d5 by taking this off first.
Sure.
And then after knight e6, I think that should be safe enough for black.
Yeah. What about queen a4? And
absolutely, queen a4 attacks two pieces.
Hit the wobbly pieces, yes.
Hit them, exactly. And what you should always home in on loose pieces, and here there are a couple of them. And so queen a4 is, you know, the move that suggests itself at least. It's the, you know, I wouldn't put it any stronger than the move you should analyze first if you were playing in a game, but well, that's what I try to do, but I'm not giving anyone any advice on how to stay out of time trouble.
Well, David Howe, perhaps.
I tried to do that once. It didn't end well.
Oh, black's losing a piece, isn't he?
Sorry?
Black's losing a piece.
Well,
well, that's the point, isn't it? Izzy, I mean,
Izzy.
Izzy Wizzy, yeah.
No, I don't think I'm in any position to give David Howell lectures on time trouble either, although...
I was being slightly ironic there. Actually.
No, I know you were, but...
Yes. Right, well, obviously, Black had seen this.
Black is Korchnoi and Black.
Yes, we can assume he would have seen that Queen A4.
Yep, indeed.
So what did he have in mind?
That is indeed the question.
Yeah.
We just take on c3, and when he if he recaptures with the b pawn, we're disturbing the knight, which is very well placed.
Well, we've kind of replaced one double attack with another double attack, so we're now
Yeah,
attacking the bishop and the knight on d4.
I don't think that's helped terribly. I
I
mean,
D5.
it might be worth noting that White's got a loose bishop on d3.
That is very worth noting. Was that you, John? Sorry, I couldn't see.
It was, in fact.
That is very well
done,
noting.
John.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Peter didn't even see that, I bet.
You really, I think.
That is extremely worth noting.
Well, it's a mental note to self.
In a peripheral sense. Well, perhaps it's not.
Can we roll back to? This isn't what happened, is it? So.
I didn't say it wasn't what happened. It very well be what happened.
Oh, you mean okay, all right.
Black's still losing a piece, isn't he?
I didn't doubt that. I mean, I want.
Well, you say Black's still losing a piece, but what about the loose bishop on d3? Doesn't that give you the germ of an idea?
Does Black play bishop c4 here?
And then b5.
B5.
No, because if I take on b4 with the bishop, I'm sort of covering b5 anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work.
No, it's indeed. What would you play if you weren't losing material? There's a question. It's not a bad thought experiment. I mean, it's
No, yeah,
It's a surreal question.
A nice Gedanken.
Yeah. If you weren't losing
as our
material,
physicists would say.
What would you do?
Is it d5?
Would you play d5 if you weren't
Queen
losing
a6?
Sorry?
So d5.
Yeah, well, we're as if we're not losing material.
I will take on a6 then. What's happening after that?
I don't know.
Okay.
If
you're honest,
I would play knight e6 if I wasn't losing material.
Exactly. And if you play knight e6,
are
you losing material?
You've obviously got bishop, you've got knight at c5.
Right, yeah.
That has somewhat been highlighted by the arrow I inadvertently left on c5. Nonetheless, okay. So that's clever.
That's a nice trick, isn't it?
Is that so obvious and it took us 30 seconds to find it? That's incredible.
Okay, but is that the end of the tactics?
No, you got bishop a3.
Exactly. So it's not the end of the tactics, which is why it's a good calculation problem. Bishop
Oh,
a3. So now, does that mean Black's not doing it very well anymore?
Right.
Black plays bishop b7 and gives up the exchange.
Exactly. There's bishop b7, and after bishop takes, queen takes. You just look at all the compensation. Oh God, I've left lots of arrows on again. There's f4 square, c5 square, and best of all, you have two horses, so you can put one on one and one on the other. And White's bishop is atrocious. White has no pawn breaks. I would say it's a serious advantage for Black.
As it says on Blackout, apart from that, all right.
Yeah, apart from that, it's okay. Exactly. Yes. But what I like about this is that I think probably it was true of White in the game. And I think it's been true of several people I've shown it to. It's very, very easy to get lost in the tactics and kind of forget the positional stuff. I mean, okay, at the end, the fact that bishop b7 sacrifices the exchange was spotted very quickly. But that hasn't always been the case. Because it kind of goes tactical blow, followed by tactical blow, followed by tactical blow. People are sometimes inclined to think whoever gets the last tactical blow in must be doing well. But of course, the previous ones were all about a piece. The last one is only about the exchange. Black's already grabbed a pawn, and white has done fantastic damage to his structure by thinking that he's landing tactical blows. And consequently, this position arises, which is, I think, very unpleasant for white. Would everybody agree that that looks pretty unpleasant for white?
Looks horrid. Horrid.
Yeah, the knight on c5 is going to be very strong.
Yeah, knight c5 might be strong, but I think if black can play more ambitiously and literally put that knight on f4 and then play something like bishop c6, d6, come round with the other knight to c5. I think Korchnoi played with the knights on c5 and f4 at one point, which is obviously a bit of a dream. So yeah, I think there's a point to be made about positional sacrifices in relation to tactics, which I would show another position of if you were interested, or if anybody does actually want to ask me anything else, it could be now.
Can we see the next position? Is that okay?
Well, by all means.
Yeah.
The next position I wanted to...
In your investigation of exchange sacrifices,
Yes.
What would you pick out as the earliest significant?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah.
One between two decent players and not, Morphy A another or something.
Oh, to be honest, I haven't done it. I haven't done it very historically. It hasn't been my main focus. I was trying to find sort of positional ideas. I think I came across, was it maybe Blackburn had an interesting one, I think, but I'm not sure if his opponent was
up to it.
Is it explained by Steinitz in one of his books as a concept? I mean, I don't know. I'm not about.
I mean, people do. There's an old term for that is not really used these days called the minor exchange.
Yes.
You sacrifice the minor exchange, suggesting that there's a major exchange. But
yes, but when does the minor exchange term come? When did that come into play? I'm not sure.
Bishop
yeah,
and knight.
I'm not sure either, actually.
I know what it means. I'm just not sure how long ago it came into.
Oh, I see what you mean.
But it's normally rook for bishop or rook for knight, isn't it? I thought.
No, I think the minor exchange is just a bishop for a knight.
Oh, is it?
Isn't the major
Yeah, to
exchange
contrast with this major exchange. Which is,
oh, okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, the exchange sacrifice certainly predates the minor exchange. Otherwise, the term wouldn't exist. But exactly when that was, I don't know. My focus has been, despite my examples today, my focus has largely been modern. I mean, I've been collecting a lot of modern examples. But I just thought for explaining, my basic ideas on it, it was probably, in a lot of cases, the older ones seem the most efficient. But, by old, they're kind of 1960s, 70s rather than the really old ones. So this is an interesting position because, well, what I wanted to ask you to try and work out was the sequence here by which white contrived to sacrifice the exchange. This is a real sort of mixing of exchange sac with tactics.
Knight d5.
So
Bishop c5.
Sorry, what was the first? Did somebody say knight d5?
Yeah, knight d5.
Yeah, I think if I was white there, well, first of all, I think white's last two moves were to double the rooks on the d file. So I'd be
doesn't want to put a pawn there, doesn't he?
I'd be quite reluctant to close the d file unless I had a really good reason. I'd be worried about bishop takes and maybe queen a4 or maybe just c3 and get on with, try and have the effects of a rook takes c3 sac without having to give anything up.
What about bishop c5?
Yeah, bishop c5 is the move that, well, again, it falls into the category of the move I'd look at first. What do you think black had in mind? Again, well, we know what he had in mind because he played it. White played bishop c5. What do you think black played in reply?
Rook b5.
If I take that, you're going to... Okay, then queen takes...
There's an almost...
And then I think I can take on d6, and there's going to be some queen a7 check after I've taken, I think, which is going to be a bit nasty.
Can we play queen b5? Oh no, you can't. Sorry,
you can't play queen b5. No.
That's definitely an exchange.
But I mean, you're all right. You're all correct that black should be targeting the loose piece. You know, the bishop on c5 isn't really, it's gone there voluntarily. It doesn't feel like it can be a loose piece in the tactical lines, but the knight on a5 is clearly a piece that White would rather have.
Queen
defended.
c7.
Yeah, Queen c7 feels like the move, absolutely. And so I guess at this point the question arises, why was bishop c5 not a blunder?
Mm.
Can we go deeper into the forest?
We do.
Yeah.
Willingly or not.
Well, yeah.
Right.
Well,
Who said they like to lure their opponent into a forest?
The rook takes d6.
Somebody say that?
Yeah, it's quite a famous. I like to.
yes.
I think it was Tal, wasn't it?
Sounds a bit.
Yeah, I like to lure my opponent into some forest of complications, or.
Oh yeah, okay. Maybe I do remember.
I can't remember the exact
Yeah,
wording.
yeah.
Something like that.
Yes.
Well, unless it was.
I think it's in 60 memorable games that it's quoted.
I don't think it is. Is it?
No, they'll probably need.
Well, I kind of used to almost know 60 memorable games off by heart. I used to know most of it, and I'm pretty sure I only learnt that quote fairly recently.
There's one about Fisher getting his to sign his score sheet when he played Tal, because Tal always thought he was going to beat him, wasn't there?
Yeah.
I think it's Evans's introduction in 60 memorable games.
You may be right. I'm going to go and check that afterwards.
Rook d6.
Don't bother
Just out of
coming.
interest, not to prove you wrong by any means, just out of interest.
Well, since I'm not wrong, it's superfluous.
You know, I meant to not to attempt to prove you wrong. You're absolutely sure. Okay, good.
No, I just made it up.
Does White have rook d6 here?
And what's the plan when I take the horse?
Okay, you play bishop b6.
Bishop takes d6.
Yeah.
And do I have b4 as a flight square after bishop b6? Because you're giving up a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you are. Not quite there, is it?
And by the way, I'm not saying rook d6 is necessarily the wrong move, but I am putting it back for the purposes of calculation.
Not my strong point.
Right.
I think the knight on a5 is a goner.
Well, in that case, Vichy played a rare blunder of a piece without much idea.
Yeah. In that position we looked at with the queen on a, where the queen ends up on b4, do you have a3 there?
Yeah, because then there's queen d6.
Yeah, I would be very worried about the number of pieces Black was accumulating. I think it's a good question. You're absolutely right. There is an a3, but I think queen d6.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you might analyze for one more move and just check White doesn't have some shot here.
Yeah. Just running out pieces. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's a bridge too far, as they say in
Indeed.
in the Netherlands. Yeah.
So,
bishop a7.
After rook takes d6, queen a5, have you got rook takes e6?
Ah, magnificent.
And I can't quite work it out. I've got some.
And if I take it, well, I'm going to take it back, because otherwise I'm going to get
in c6.
E7's falling.
Bishop takes
e7, and then
bishop takes bishop, and then queen a7 check.
Exactly. Isn't that beautiful?
Hey!
Oh,
that's evil.
That is a very beautiful. And of course, if you're playing this in a game, you kind of have a twofold task. You have to calculate that line, which is far from trivial, and then you have to assess the compensation at the end, which makes it all the more impressive, I think. I mean, I don't think I want to show you the whole game, because actually, okay, I could show you a few moves. Rook b7, bishop d6. I like the way White just keeps control in this game by keeping that bishop on d6. It actually holds all Black's pieces back quite badly. I'm not convinced knight d7 is the best move. White, because then White can switch to the king side. Queen d8. And here, interestingly, given everything I said at the beginning, apparently White's best was to play the endgame. And every time White exchanges queens in an exchange sack, I find myself wanting to say, okay, so why is this justified? And I think it is the completely hopeless nature of Black's open files. I think the bishop on e5 controls a lot, although it may struggle to stay there. But as long as White doesn't sort of take on g7 at the moment and at the wrong moment and open the g file, I think White's basic setup is probably to play bishop d6. Whoops. What bishop d6 and then to play e5 and knight e4.
Yeah.
And I think that's an incredibly beautiful second. And you sort of sense quite how poor the rooks are with no open files and no targets to hit. And actually, Vichy played queen h5 check, which somewhat complicated the task. But I really wanted to show this because I thought the tactic is well worth solving, and the conversation at the end of it is quite instructive too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No one's going to ask me a question about anything else, are they? Which is fine. I mean, I'm quite happy not to be asked about anything else. But I also am happy to be if you have any.
What was the favourite book that you wrote, Peter? Changing the subject completely.
Oh, quite honestly?
Yeah.
And we
could try and guess, I suppose.
Honestly, because, you know, the answer I give obviously suits my present purposes, but the honest answer is Chess Improvement is the favourite book I've written.
Right.
I really enjoyed writing it, even though, you know, it got a little bit fraught because I fell sort of a bit behind time-wise with it. I got into time trouble. But, you know, I got a lot of satisfaction from it because I think it says something quite original and unusual that hasn't been said. It's been said in other areas to some extent, but certainly not within chess. And I think we did quite well at putting it into a chess context. And it was very, you know, it was nice to write with an author a fellow author who really knew his stuff and whose stuff was a bit different from my stuff, and who I also think is a very good writer. So it's nice to write alongside someone who you think is constructing good writing as well. Because I don't know, some chess books, I don't think the authors have spent that long making sure that they're well written. But
how does the process work in terms of
write a book?
Sorry?
How long does it take you to write a book, typically?
Well, it depends what else I'm doing, very much, really. I mean, that book took about 4 years to get done, but I was sort of doing quite a lot of other things at the same time, so they kept impinging on it. I think the plan had obviously been to write it a lot quicker than that, but it kept getting delayed. But fortunately,
did the idea for that book start with you, that you then took to did the idea for that book start in your head, and then you took the idea to a publisher, or did a publisher come to you and say,
no, the idea started,
we've got a gap in the portfolio, would you like to write something?
The idea started in Barry Heimer's head.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to meet him, and then we discussed mindset and stuff over a dinner. And it went from there. I mean, the book was almost completed before we went anywhere near a publisher.
Oh, right. Okay.
We had no idea which publisher we were going to approach at that point. But
is that generally
we had
how
some
it works?
ideas. But
you know, someone has the idea and part writes a book and then takes it to a publisher.
I'm sure that happens sometimes, but that certainly wasn't. No, as I say, we was almost finished before Crown House got involved.
I don't think that's the most common route. It's normally the publisher will commission someone to write. They'll see a gap somewhere.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, someone like Everyman.
That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
They'll probably think, well, there hasn't been a book written on, I don't know.
Well, I think usually with my books, I've usually gone to publishers with an idea, but I have usually gone to them at the beginning of the process rather than the end. We were pretty determined to write this and didn't want to be put off by any publisher skepticism or anything. So we were reasonably confident that if we did a decent job, somebody would take it, I think. You know, somebody who we would be happy with. But I think getting Crown House to do it was a bit of a bonus, because with all due respect to the chess publishers I've worked with, some of whom have been very good, I think Crown House did an amazing job marketing and just promoting the book. I mean, for a while it was very prominent, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And they were just lovely to work with, actually. They were really great. So
who's the commissioning editor there, Peter?
The commissioning editor. Well, it was. I think. Well, I don't want to go into too much detail about how we got, but I think Barry knew people there. Barry had written for them before, so he. But obviously, this was their first venture into the chess market, anyway. So,
Peter, may I ask how you think we can improve chess in England and the UK, particularly to encourage younger players and particularly to encourage more female players?
Sorry, I can't actually see who asked that. Who asked that, Chris?
Martin.
Martin.
Martin, hi. Sorry, I've lost you. I should stop sharing, shouldn't I?
Yeah, stop sharing and you'll see it.
Then I can see more people. Yes, sorry. Okay, so do you mean to encourage more young players to play, or to encourage more young players who are actually going to be very strong and become part of the national team?
I think both. I mean, it's a common theme. I think we're all keen to get more chess players. Generally, we're all keen to get more female chess players for obvious reasons. But how can the chess world in the UK encourage that? What can be done? I don't want to lead the answer by mentioning the government or the ECF or anybody else. I was interested to hear what you might think.
Well, okay, I suppose. I mean, obviously, I've thought about both questions, but I suppose I've put more effort into thinking about how to foster the very strong players, because that's kind of the job I was doing for a while, and that's where I've put, most thought. Okay. I mean, there's a real problem, I think, in that there's a limit to how much effort people will put into chess if they don't see some prospect of either making a living from it or it being a very substantial part of what they do into adulthood. Because otherwise, I mean, it's great for its own sake, and it is a good learning tool for other things, and there are all kinds of reasons to learn chess up to a certain level, but taking it to the top level, I think, tends to be linked with a goal like that. And it's pretty difficult now for anyone other than I think, the top few players whose names we could all mention are doing fine now, probably, but I'm not sure it's always even been true for them. So, in some way, I think there needs to be, I don't think we'll reach the heights we reached in the 1980s again. I mean, by the way, it's not that obvious that we kind of have a right to think in those terms. We did staggeringly well in the 1980s in a way which is, we can point to some reasons, but still pretty incredible what happened for a country of the size of the UK. I think that being a chess professional needs to be a more attractive proposition if we're going to have players reaching the very top level. And that may be a matter of government. It may be a matter of, there seems to be some opportunity now in the obviously increased popularity of chess in recent times. But, a lot of the attention seems to be going to kind of popular streamers and people who are popularizing the game, rather than necessarily to the people who are playing it at the very highest level. Okay, the very, very highest level, it's clear now that they're doing even better from this burst in popularity. But they were kind of the guys who were doing fine anyway. There need to be some reasonable financial incentives at the kind of period where people are moving to 2600 and beyond rather than to 2750 or something. And I think that's a problem in most countries at most times, but it's traditionally been probably even more of a problem here. Partly because it's more, a lot of the countries that did well were relatively cheap to live in. This country is quite expensive to live in, and the government has obviously supported chess far less than it does in some other countries and so on. But again, I don't necessarily sense from some grassroots ECF members that kind of hunger for international success. And I think if you don't have that, then it's difficult to kind of, I think that there needs to be a broader desire that that's a really important priority before you can get, for example, the ECF spending a lot of money on that kind of thing.
If you look at the real elite players that are sort of playing today, they all seem to be getting their grandmaster titles around the sort of 14 to 16 age group. And obviously you've got an infrastructure in place that makes that happen. We just don't seem to have that in this country. So where are you identifying the sort of the younger talents?
That's true to some extent, although I actually think that you don't necessarily, I think that happens partly because you can see the end goal. I do think, having that end goal where people are flourishing, if they do reach that level, is actually quite an important part of getting people to put the effort in to reach that level. Somewhere like China, it's clear that it's very clear what route people will be able to go down if they achieve very highly, and it gives a kind of a clearer goal, which motivates a lot of people to do it. Now, I don't, for the moment, propose that we could do the kind of things here that China does. For
no, I think it's high, yeah.
But I do think it's quite. I'm not entirely clear that the lack of training is leading to the lack of top players so much as the lack of seeing how good things are for the top players is affecting the motivation. I mean, almost all of the strong juniors I've worked with were clearly, and quite reasonably, not a criticism, but were clearly giving a heavy priority to academic stuff over chess at certain key moments in a way which probably wasn't happening in the countries where champions are being made more easily.
Yeah.
And I quite understand why they do that. And I think it's probably rationally the right decision to do. And it's obviously a decision which is going to come naturally to most parents. But at the end of the day, I think if you can't get the top professional scene right, then you won't get the very ambitious top juniors right either. I mean, it's hard actually. At the moment, it's actually hard to say where our junior chess is, because we have a lot of strong players who have hardly moved a piece other than online for a year and a half.
Mm.
It's interesting that some of the active GMs, a lot of the active GMs in England never attended university, and the ones that did attend are not active anymore. So, for example, if you compare the cohort of Nunn, Spielman, Steen, Mestel,
yep,
compare that group with, say, the Hebden, Gormally, Williams, Hawke.
Williams did go to university, actually. But yes, I take the point.
Well, Hebden went for a year and then stopped.
Oh, he did, yeah. Hebden, but Simon actually graduated, I think.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is there seems to be they tend to fall into two camps, don't they? They kind of what I may miscall the academic GMs and the non-academic GMs, if you like.
Yeah.
And
well, I might put in a claim to be the most active of the academic GMs, almost. Not quite, but in the last few months, I probably am. Yes.
Also, the absence of the Grand Prix circuit is, I think, for in the 70s and 80s, a lot of players could survive making a living from the League Grand Prix or the Cutty Sark Grand Prix.
I think that's true, although I don't think that
doesn't exist anymore.
I think that's a living which does really hard to compete with sort of high-paying graduate jobs and that sort of thing. But yes,
but
you need a pretty passionate commitment to the game for its own sake to go down.
It did satisfy the non-academic players.
Yes, okay.
During that period.
Yeah.
I think two things happened though at the end of the 1980s. First of all, there wasn't the interest in chess, and secondly, the Berlin Wall came down, and Western Europe was flooded by a whole cohort of extremely strong sort of GMs and IMs from the Soviet bloc that sort of headed west. Yeah, headed west.
I know about that because that's basically when I started my professional.
What, you mean they came
so I
over
got to see it firsthand.
They came over and hoovered up the prize money, you mean?
Absolutely.
Well, kind of. Yeah, it wasn't quite as bad as that, but it was quite bad, yes. Yeah, it made it a lot harder. I mean, I didn't see that many Western grandmasters celebrating the arrival of freedom in the Eastern Bloc.
Another
way that one might have wished to see,
Another factor is the absence of sufficient FIDE rated events.
Yeah, I think that's always been an issue. I mean, we're doing quite well for FIDE rated weekend tournaments, but longer tournaments are thin on the ground.
And also an absence of characters such as Leonard Barden, who did a tremendous. There's no direct equivalent really these days of what Leonard did and what he achieved.
No, I mean, I think there is a reasonable amount of support for the juniors, I think, and there are quite a lot of strong players who are in some way involved in working with the juniors. But
there wasn't any overall coordination. There isn't. There seems to be an absence of overall coordination of that pool of talent. Whereas in the 70s and 80s, with Leonard's efforts, it was fairly clear what was going on and who was improving and who wasn't.
Do you not think it's fairly clear now? I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's clear now, partly because of lockdown, but I think, I had a pretty good idea of who was who 20 months ago. It's been very, very difficult to keep track of who's improving and who's not improving through lockdown, because online chess has proven a somewhat unreliable guide in different ways for reasons I don't particularly want to go into. But it's not the most reliable guide in the world, I don't think. It's for a start, aside from any particularly unpleasant issues, it's just a very different thing. I think a lot of people struggle to get in. Well, for me, it's a matter of I struggle to get into the kind of atmosphere of the thing. It just doesn't motivate me or excite me in the same way as over the board chess.
I don't think it's that attractive playing online people that you don't know who they are. It certainly helps.
Oh, I mean, I don't think I've ever played people where I don't know who they are, but I find it playing particularly attractive even when I didn't know who they were. I don't know.
I think we all sympathise with that comment, Peter, or certainly a lot of us do. But something we've noticed in the last few months with some new members coming along to Camberley Chess Club,
yes,
where we played the odd over-the-board games, is something fascinating that we didn't even anticipate. And that's, you sit against somebody over the board and you say to them, well, how long have you played chess? And he says, well, I learned in the last year. Oh, right. And they say, I learned online.
I've never played over the board before, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. They have never played with pieces before and a clock. And so this is new to them. So this is a whole new market.
Absolutely.
And it's, quite incredible to play against somebody over the board who's never played a move and pressed a clock.
So I guess my question to you is, how are they finding the transition to over the board?
A good question. I mean, we don't really know yet properly.
We'll find out in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah. By the way, I should say, if people are listening into this that I wasn't trying to I was speaking very much from my own personal perspective. I mean, I do think online chess, I think it's a great achievement by the ECF actually to put the amount of online chess in place that it has done, and I have got total respect for that, and I know that it has suited some people very well. It's just from speaking for myself, I think it's been difficult to motivate myself, and speaking as a junior selector, I've found it difficult to have it as an entirely reliable guide to who is doing what, to put it that way.
I think we see our biggest challenge is harnessing that online interest and getting people to the over the board club, and playing face to face and joining the overboard club, playing matches for us. That's our big challenge in the coming weeks.
Yes. Well, I mean, you guys presumably by having a series of online events, you kind of, in some way, I imagine you might make yourselves more approachable as a club in real life by people having seen you online and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
I might hope.
Yeah.
It's certainly. I mean, it's an impressive effort for a club, isn't it, to run this number?
But of course, it relies on some of the online members being local enough to Camberley.
Yeah, no, that's true.
That it's feasible to come along, because a lot of the online members don't live anywhere near Camberley.
No,
that in itself is a success that we've attracted them, but that's a different thing from the online being a feeder for the over the board. We need that to work as well. The online's good, good as in its own right, but to be a feeder, it relies on the interest being local.
So to get back to the other half of the original question, are you getting any new female members?
No.
No, none at all.
No real progress at all, I think, would be a good summary, which is disappointing, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, and that's also, I mean, the three clubs that I'm fairly closely involved with are, as well as Camberley, Crowthorne and Guildford, and it's the same for all three.
Same story, yeah.
Yes, it's no different.
So is the increase in women's interest in chess primarily an online interest, do you think? Is it the fact that it's been online, which is, as well as the Queen's Gambit, kind of contributed to the interest, and that isn't likely to translate? Is that the most likely?
Yeah.
Well, if we were really honest, we'd say there hasn't been a significant increase even in the online interest from females. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but we haven't particularly seen it coming to these meetings, and certainly not the over the board.
I think at Guildford, we've certainly seen the online activity translate into over the board players. I mean, we've had a massive influx.
Oh, really massive?
New
Yeah.
players.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic, but no women.
But no women, none at all.
I can't think of one. No. We've probably got 20, I don't know, Mike, help me out, 20 new people who've actually turned up at the club to play over the board in since we've restarted in September, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But not a single woman.
So when you see coverage of women in chess, I'm going to make a slightly controversial point now. When you see coverage of women in chess, you often see a description of the chess world as being somewhat misogynistic. And you see very few people denying this claim.
Christine,
you almost get the feeling that the chess world has kind of decided that the best way to attract women is to sort of confess to being misogynistic and say it will do better in future. I'm not convinced that it actually is that misogynistic, and I wonder whether saying that you think it is and it will do better in future is really the right way to go about it.
I would say it's. I'll say it's pretty
Christine,
neutral.
since you're laughing, can I hear your take?
No, it certainly used to be misogynistic. Certainly when I first started playing.
But do you think it still is? Do you?
No, I think it's got a lot better actually, and I think that reputation doesn't do it any good at all, because I think now I think that women are much more welcome.
Yeah. So although you were laughing at me, might I be slightly onto something there, in that isn't a very good way to kind of present ourselves?
It isn't a very good way at all.
No, but I do get the feeling that no one disputes the claim. Whereas, I mean, part of the claim is clearly true, that there are a number of sexist comments made by individual people in the chess world. But when it comes to, what might be termed structural sexism or something like that, there's actually a lot of effort made to attract female players. The oft-made claim that women are competing for lower prizes is actually not true, because there are no men's tournaments. So it's kind of only true if you implicitly believe that women can't achieve at a certain level, which I don't believe. So,
well, I think with some of the decent female players like Louise Head and people like that who've come up younger, because I mean I've seen her rise from about the age of, what was she when she started? I don't know, 9.
8 or 9.
8 or 9. So I think from the point of view of the younger girls coming through, I think it actually does hold.
Oh,
sorry,
muted. Christine's muted herself.
I can't blame the cat. And I think there's been a lot of, certainly in junior girls chess, but it's the same in junior boys chess. They get to a certain point and then they concentrate on exams.
Yeah.
Well, normally the transition, they fall off a cliff in the transition between primary school and secondary school.
That's one of the big data moments, isn't it?
I mean, the most active age group, I think, for junior chess is probably 9-10. And then it just falls away completely.
Yeah. The other challenge that clubs have is a critical mass. I mean, if one 10 or 12-year-old girl comes along on her own and sees a bunch of old greybeards, and Christine.
No, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think that's
they're not going to come back, and the parents aren't going to get a warm, fuzzy feeling about that. There's almost got to be.
No, absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
You said before in interview, I think the main problem is
where do you start? How do you get over? How do you get? From 0 to a critical mass?
Well, you have to run a junior club.
There was a woman in London, Amanda. I can't think of her second name.
Ross.
She set up.
Amanda Ross, Mike.
Yeah, Amanda Ross. Yeah, she set up a club called Casual Chess or similar, which met on a weekday evening. And at the time, I was chair of the ECF Council, And I tried to get support for her. She wanted some modest funding and connections with the ECF, and people in the ECF were incredibly suspicious of her because she wasn't, as far as I could see, she wasn't one of us. She didn't have the same background as us in playing in other local clubs, and she was focused particularly on trying to coach women. But I can't remember exactly how much funding she was trying to get from the ECF to fund some coaching, but basically she got absolutely nowhere. So I mean, okay, that was 3 years ago or something, but
I mean, you now hear the ECF talking quite a lot about the importance of casual chess, don't you? And as if they've recognised that this is a group of people who they actually need to try and bring to a slightly sort of firmer relationship with the game. But so just 3 years ago it was like that. That's a bit, disappointing.
Yes.
And I think a lot of these newcomers are keen to play casual. They don't particularly want to be forced into using a timer, and they don't particularly want to know that their games are going to be rated. They just want to play casual chess necessarily without a time control and just.
And I think that's what happened when women do come along to chess.
Yeah, I think they get frightened away.
They get intimidated. It's not frightened. They get intimidated.
Well, all right.
By they certainly do, because that happened to the ones that came. There were a couple that came to Camberley, and they do feel intimidated if there are men there. It is a lot easier if you do have a female there, but they get intimidated because as you say, they're not actually interested in playing in league matches.
This is the problem. I agree with you. Yeah, the assumption is that anyone that coming to a chess club automatically has a desire to play in league matches, has a desire to get their games rated, has a desire to play with timers and all of this stuff. And I don't think that's true. And there are a lot, you say the typical clientele for say U3A. They don't want any of that.
If that is the case, what do they want from the Federation? I mean, we can think of good reasons.
I don't think they want anything
play at all, but I'm not sure the Federation really has a role there, does it?
Only to facilitate what they do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And that's it. And for them, the activity is chess is a means of meeting people. It's a means of having a social event, and it happens to be via chess. But it could be via something else.
Well, I also think that...
And so they're not particularly interested in the intricacies of rook and pawn endings or anything like that.
Not individually, no, but then nor is anybody. A lot of people that come along are...
I wouldn't say go that far, Christine.
That's for exchange sacrifice as well.
Oh, yes.
No, forget that.
If you encourage them to come along in a social atmosphere, eventually they will get into playing matches. I mean...
Yeah, exactly.
Some of them will. If you don't set that environment for a large number of people, you won't get down to a few that decide, hey, this is really for me, I'm interested.
Yeah. I mean, it's a rather different point, but if you look on Twitter or somewhere, you will see a huge number of females who wouldn't have been there 2 years ago, who are now actively involved in discussing their desire to improve at chess and actually discussing rook and pawn endings and all these other things that nobody's interested in. It's actually quite a substantial community, and that is one big change. And I don't know whether that translates in some way into the over the board world, but I wasn't on Twitter a year ago, but I'm pretty sure these people are almost all new. Many of them are new, and it's quite a change, I would have thought.
Peter, do you know all these people on Twitter? Can we ask you to? No,
I don't know them at all. They're some of them are even anonymous handles and things, but they're clearly. I'm pretty clear that they're genuinely women and they're genuinely interested in rook and pawn endings in a way that Christine apparently isn't. So.
Let's encourage them by telling them about our events and getting them to come along.
I didn't say that women weren't interested in rook and pawn endings. I was saying when women come along casually to a chess club.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely, Christine. I was only joking.
They are not.
Christine, I was only joking. Absolutely, I know.
Yeah, just winding us.
Anyway, but I probably could try to encourage them. For which purpose it would help if Camberley Chess
you
Club
on
followed me on
Twitter?
Twitter.
Peter, are you on Twitter?
Yes, I am. Yes,
So
I
let me
tweeted about
ask-
this morning, but
Let me ask you a direct question, which you might not like me asking, but did you promote this event on your Twitter feed beforehand?
I did this morning, and Camberley Chess Club didn't notice.
Excellent. Okay, so that's great. I mean, and we literally find people who we invite on and we promote them, and then they forget to put that on their own Twitter feed.
No, I only did it today, but I did do it today. I also did see that you'd promoted the event, so I.
Oh yeah. We always promote the event on Twitter and Facebook. But yeah, it is about advertising and promotion. And as you say, if there are people around who are interested in this stuff, somehow we've got to reach them and get them interested, and that will help them think that there is a community other than just Twitter or just playing on chess.com or whatever.
Yep.
So what's your impression of FIDE's latest sponsor?
Well, I wasn't very delighted, but
it doesn't seem to make any sense to me particularly, but
I suspect it's not so much a matter of, I mean, it's quite possible that, I mean, you know, it's quite possible that they would argue with some justification that there wasn't a similar amount of money available from elsewhere. I mean, I doubt if, I doubt if they would have gone to this particular sponsor had they had equivalent offers from elsewhere. But I do think they could have paid a bit more attention to the optics, yes, to say the least.
Very bizarre choice.
And by the way, I have tweeted on that subject as well. But yes. So yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's quite strange.
But I think this year has presented an opportunity that's not arisen for, well, as far as I can remember, in managing these newcomers and not frightening them away. I think clubs have a duty to, well, I feel they have a duty to manage these newcomers and get them involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without immediately saying, what's your grading?
I think that's one of the worst questions. But to be fair, we covered the question, what's your grading in chess improvement? It's just not a helpful question in general. It's not.
I know, but I mean, I've noticed when newcomers arrive at a chess club, someone will say, or even, what is your grading?
No, I watched them do it. I think it's one of the most disastrous moments. Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Yeah. In fact, I think in my interview with the ECF newsletter, I think I actually said that would be one of the most helpful things that could be done to promote chess would be to avoid the question, what's your grade? I think I went very much down that road. Yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think we probably
apart from the fact I don't want anyone asking me at the moment.
Well, it's probably in 4 figures now, is it?
Yeah, it's not in a healthy state. Sorry?
Yeah.
We probably need to draw things to a close because it's 10:30, but we really appreciate, Peter, you coming on today. And not only was it interesting from the point of view of the topic, sacrifices. I mean, I'm rethinking sacrifices because of what you said. And most of the games you showed and most of the analysis you showed I'd not seen before, and it was very useful to me personally, and I think to a lot of other people. And the other thing is, it was quite a different topic from any we've had. We've had openings, we've had particular people, we've had all that kind of stuff, but this was kind of a different topic, a different way of looking at things, which was very refreshing, actually. So thank you very much. And thank you for the questions and answers at the end, which probably we won't, well, actually, we can put it online for our members, but we certainly won't put all of that stuff on YouTube for everybody else. But I think if people have paid to be a member and they've come on tonight, then I'll stick that on if that's okay by you.
Well, I don't think any of us said anything we really regret being public, but I'm quite happy for you to do it like that. Yeah.
Well, we don't put anything public on anymore now anyway. We only put it for paid members.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Members, yeah.
The first few minutes are public, aren't they, Martin?
Yeah, I do a taster video for a few minutes to get people interested, and that hopefully directs them to to the website and to wanting to be an online member. And that's the way we do it now, because frankly, we've got some fantastic speakers like yourself and many others this year. And, you know, why would we give all that away for nothing? You know, we need to not just give it away. So anyway, so thank you very much again, Peter, for coming on. We really appreciate it, and we'd love to invite you again, because the style and the way you delivered it was perfect for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Peter.
Yeah, very good.
Thanks very much.